Okay. Yeah. Okay, Mary, well, welcome. I'll just leave you to introduce yourself, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for inviting me on to speak with you all today. I know that a number of people, as I think it was Barb's, you've just said that you've come down from Liverpool,
Yeah.
and obviously Apsana as well. I appreciate that. There's probably a lot of people who are still on Liverpool time. I myself am also still on Liverpool time. I got the train back earlier today, so it's really great to just see everybody. I've got a small presentation. I'm going to just try and share my screen. So if you bear with me, can I just check, Carol, have I got about 15 minutes to speak?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Lovely. Sorry, my computer's just waking up. Hopefully it will just allow me to do this. There we go. Lovely. Can I get a bit of a thumbs up from everyone on the screen just to see if you can
see? We can see that. Yeah.
Lovely. That's great. Great. So it's fantastic, as I say, to be with you all here today. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the National Education Union's campaign called Free School Meals for All. Now, those of you who were at Liverpool, maybe you saw us around. I'll certainly talk about some of the things we did a little bit later in this talk. But for those of you who maybe are a bit new to the campaign, we are very, very proud to have the SHA as coalition partners and supporters of the Free School Meal campaign. And it's a very simple campaign. It very much does what it says on the tin. We believe that all children in primary school should absolutely have access to a free school meal. We believe that children, if they're hungry in school, they cannot learn, they cannot achieve their best. That means that has a huge impact on how well they do in school, how much they enjoy school, and the socialization aspects of that as well. From a health perspective, we know that we've got children in this country who are growing up with malnutrition. So not just actually not having enough food, but also not having the right kind of quality food. And we know that has a much bigger impact on their health as children and into their later lives as well. But from a teaching perspective, the National Education Union, we are the largest education union in Europe. We're the fourth largest trade union in this country. We know from what our members tell us that children who are coming into school, if they're hungry, they're more anxious, they're less likely to enjoy school, they find it harder to concentrate, they find it harder to focus, and they absolutely cannot achieve all the things that they should be able to achieve in school. And so we think that if we were to expand free school meal provision, this would go a long way in terms of helping those children learn more and again, just I think enjoy school, which I think cannot be prioritised enough. So I want to give you just a few facts and figures, and these have been alluded to a little bit earlier. But we are, I think, in a really shameful state in our nation, and there's been a lot of talk of late, certainly since the new government was elected, about the terrible economic inheritance that the new government has got, and I think that really can't be kind of stated enough. We are the 6th richest country in the world, and yet we've got 4.3 million children who are growing up in poverty in the UK. So to put that into perspective, that's an equivalent of an average of every 9 children in every class of 30 pupils who are growing up in poverty. We know that last year, over 4 million children experienced food insecurity. So again, that is about skipping meals or actually just not having access to the right kind of nutritious meal. And this is, again, where we believe that free school meals for all, if that was to become a universal policy, this could really tackle that huge issue of food poverty. And again, not just making sure kids eat and have a hot, healthy dinner, but making sure that they've got the right kind of food in their bellies too. This campaign really acknowledges as well how difficult it is to get school food right. We know that less than 2% of packed lunches meet the right nutritional standards. Now that's, I think, partly because of a lot of parents and carers potentially being time poor. There's a lot of families out there who are maybe working more than one job. By the time they get their children back to their homes in the evening, if you're trying to then put together the dinner for that night, as well as some sort of nutritious meal for the following day, that actually can be very limiting. That can be very difficult to do. If you think as well about, I guess, the nature of just school lunches as well, you're going to have to give your child something that they're not going to have to heat up. If you're doing a packed lunch, you've got to do something that can actually be safe and edible throughout the day. So that rules a lot of things out. If the food obviously gets too warm and manky, that can make your child not very well. It can't be necessarily something that they've got to store in the fridge. All of these barriers actually make it very difficult to put together that kind of packed lunch that young people really need in school. And again, we think is a really obvious example of why this should be something that is universal. There's a lot of talk about the current system being means tested. That means that every child in up to year 2 gets a free school meal, but after that, then there's a big drop off because it's only children then who are from families on very, very challenging circumstances. So families who have less than £7,400 as their total income. So that actually means that a lot of working families who are still on very, very low wages miss out. And again, this brings us into the problem of actually families creating packed lunches, and those lunches actually not really being good enough for those children who are coming into school, regardless of how much their parents are earning. One of the other big issues with the means tested system we have at the moment is that in England, we know that 1 in 3 children growing up in poverty aren't actually entitled to free school meals. So that's around 900,000 children who are growing up in very, very challenging circumstances. And yet they're almost not poor enough to access this scheme, which again, I think just shows the real flaws of this. And on top of that, we know that nearly 500,000 children who actually are entitled, who do meet that very, very low economic criteria, they're actually not registered for them. And there's a whole range of reasons why that might be. The current means testing system we know is very, very complicated. It's quite inaccessible if, say, maybe English is a second language. That could be quite a difficult thing to find out. We know that there are lots and lots of families who actually refuse help. They feel really stigmatized by the fact that they're being offered this additional support. They feel very much that there's a lot of shame attached to this as well. They don't want their children being singled out as, needing that extra help. And that impacts on take-up as well. So there's a whole range of circumstances around why, if we were to make free school meals something that was universal, it would cut through a lot of the stuff that limits children being able to access the food they need in school. And it would, I think, push back a huge amount on things like stigma and shame, which also impacts on how a child feels at school. There are a lot of children out there, we know because we've spoken to them, because they've spoken to other people involved in this campaign, who would actually rather go hungry or rather have some food that is less healthy, less good for them, than feel like they are being shamed, like their families being brought into questioning because they've got this this additional kind of label they feel on them. We don't want any children in schools walking around feeling like they've got poor written on their back. And if we have universal provision, that means children can come in, sit down, everything's left at the classroom door, and they can just eat together, grow together, and just be together in school. So one of the key things that we think about is, certainly from a teaching perspective, is how does child hunger impact pupils' experience of school? And as health experts yourself, it's all very obvious. If there's a child hungry in school, we know that they can't focus, they can't concentrate, they might be feeling a lot more kind of on edge, they might be feeling a lot more anxious. And that experience of school is much more of a negative one. If you're worried about where you're going to get your next dinner, if you're worried about how you're going to be getting through the afternoon when your friends are maybe coming in with a lot more energy than you, this is just something that will always have a negative impact on your time at school. And we know that if children are then having that kind of anxiety lifted off them, they do a huge amount better. Now, normally when I do this, I actually, when I do this around schools, I get participants to guess the flags, but I will spare you that because I appreciate we've all had a long day. But one of the arguments that we get thrown at us with this campaign is that it's too complicated, it's too difficult to do. This is something that just can't be rolled out. It's too tricky. And we want to look to international examples for that, because actually there's a huge number of international examples that show that free school meals for all is absolutely and very much a possibility. And when you think about the economic context of some of these countries compared to ours, it does feel a bit like, how can we find an excuse here? So there's, I won't read through them all, but there's a huge number of countries here we can take inspiration from, especially countries like Finland, like Sweden, who have been doing free school meals long before it was something that other countries were thinking about as well. Finland in particular have been doing them since the end of World War II. And actually, strangely enough, when I was getting the train up to Liverpool a few days ago, I had my Free School Meals for All campaign t-shirt on, and I met a gentleman on the train who had married a Finnish woman and had a child, and grew up, and the child had grown up in Finland. And he was just saying it was an absolute no-brainer. He didn't understand why the country of his birth, which was England, wasn't doing the same thing. And he kind of waxed lyrical for a long time about what an important part it was of the school system for his kid. And it was really interesting. It was really actually interesting having that person who was, he'd moved back to London back to England from Finland, and he was just really struggling to understand why there were these kind of two different systems in place. But these different countries really acknowledge that actually they want to invest in their young people, they want to invest in their children, they are putting their money where their mouth is. And these countries aren't doing this just to be nice. These countries are doing this because they can see that actually if you invest in this younger generation, if you've got children who are coming into school and they are not hungry, that society is going to do better. And you have to think, actually, if they can do it in a number of these countries abroad, then absolutely what is stopping us here? So to give you a bit of an idea just about where we are actually as a country, this is what's going on in the United Kingdom currently. So free school meals are very much now more part of the national conversation, which is brilliant. And there are parts of the UK that are hugely leading the way. So Wales very recently actually became the first UK nation to provide every child in primary school with a free school meal. Scotland, they are further ahead of us as well. They've actually, unfortunately, the current government in Scotland, so I've just come off this train from Liverpool, so apologies, but Scotland has unfortunately rolled back a little bit on some of their commitments to universal free school meal provision. So that's a battle we're going to still keep fighting, but currently they are still further ahead of us. They still provide free school meals to children up to the age of 10. Now that's 3 years longer than what we do in England, because in England it's only universal up to year 2, which is about 7 years old. So in Scotland, there's still an acknowledgement that actually hunger doesn't cut off when you get into the kind of the top bit of primary school. And again, part of the work we've done of late in our campaign, in our Free School Meals for All campaign, is we've launched a national tour. We've been travelling around the country. I'll talk a bit about that more a little later on, but essentially in a bright blue Scooby-Doo van. And we've been travelling around speaking to different primary school children, visiting different schools. And one of the key things that we've had back from school children themselves is how disconcerting they find it when they come in to school in year 2 and they all sit down and eat together, and then coming back to that same school in year 3, in the next year up, and they don't have that provision. And they actually find that a very strange experience. They don't understand why this is something that suddenly has to happen to them later on. So I think Scotland, again, is a good example here about how that should be all through provision. And of course, London has been, it's been a huge win for us having London extend free school meals for all primary school pupils. But actually, this is something that some boroughs in London have been way ahead of the curve for a number of years. And those boroughs in London have been funding this themselves out of their own kind of coffers, which has been a real challenge, I'm sure, for them. But that has really led the way to the Mayor of London looking into this, seeing how this can work as a provision, and announcing funding to make this something that was available to all children in London. After a year of that, he's now promised to make this permanent for as long as he is in office. And we're just seeing, again, lots and lots of results already in London about how children are already benefiting from this, how parents are already benefiting from this. We've done a number of pieces of research around this, including something called the universalism multiplier, which we've been able to really kind of do a deep dive into how this citywide provision has supported schools, supported children. And unsurprisingly, it's been a hugely popular policy that's been rolled out. We're hearing a lot from children who are saying that they feel a lot better prepared in school. Now we're hearing a lot from parents who are saying that the pressure's off them a little bit financially. But it's had a lot of interesting other benefits as well that we actually weren't anticipating. So one was about how it's improved this universal provision, relationships between schools and parents and carers. There were a number of schools where parents were racking up really astonishing dinner money debt, where children were coming in and they weren't entitled to a free school meal, and the schools we were talking to were saying, we're absolutely not going to turn any child away. If they're hungry, we are going to feed them. But that bill is then passed on to parents who haven't been able to pay it in certain circumstances, and they are literally racking up sort of hundreds and hundreds of pounds they're owing the school, which the school, because of how incredibly tight school budgets are, we know the terrible issues with school funding. Schools haven't been able to just let that go, but because of this rollout of free school meal provision for all students in London, schools have then been able to write off that debt. And they've been able to rebuild those relationships where previously parents and carers were avoiding schools, avoiding dropping their kids off in the playground, avoiding taking phone calls from school, absolutely desperately trying to dodge teachers because they were worried about being chased for this debt. Now that's been removed. Those relationships have actually got a lot stronger. And that was something, again, we didn't really anticipate, but it's another huge benefit of breaking down those barriers. So, the key person here, which is the child, can be that priority. So to give you a bit of a wider just view of the campaign, now I know a lot of you on this call will have seen some of this already, and again, we're really proud to stand in partnership with you. But the Free School Meals for All campaign, I think, is in some ways quite an unusual campaign because we are an incredibly broad coalition. We've got more than 300 organisations across civil society, which really represents the strength of this movement. And we have a very, very broad coalition. So we've got groups such as yourself, full of medical and health experts. We've got charities behind us. We obviously have a lot of young people, parents, carers, educators behind us. But we engage with faith leaders. We engage with trade unions, caterers, MPs and various mayoral candidates as well, academic researchers, journalists, football groups, fans against fans supporting food banks is a real huge supporter of this. And that is intentional, that is completely intentional. So we can actually show the government that this is something that people from across the board, people from a variety of different places and histories are all united in saying free school meals for all absolutely makes sense from a health perspective, an education perspective, a morals perspective. It's a lot of people from lots of different backgrounds all using voices from different areas to achieve the same thing. And we've been really, really pleased to work alongside the press as well. We've got a lot of press really covering this and making sure this is something that is part of the national conversation and pushing back against some of the more harmful things in the press that have happened, I think, over the last 14, 15 years, where people who are poorer, children who come from poorer families, have been absolutely demonised by the right-wing press. And there has been this idea of scroungers and the deserving or the undeserving poor, which has been completely whipped into a frenzy and has taken away what's the reality of children who are growing up where food is something that is a real concern for them. Another thing we've done is been really prioritising in terms of pulling people together, so both physically and across social media. So we've done a number of events and campaigns where we've all been brought together. You can see us outside last year's Labour Party conference there, and outside number 10 with a number of different people from different backgrounds and MPs, as well as a lot of work on social media. So if you sign up to our campaign, you'll get very frequent communication with us where we try and keep pushing that social media conversation. So again, we can just make sure that MPs from across the board, wherever they are, whether they're in Westminster, the constituency, or online, they can see this is something that we are all talking about. As I mentioned earlier, we've just actually drawn to a close our Free School Meals for All national tour. There's our Scooby van just in the background there. But we have been, over the last sort of 3 weeks, driving across the country. We've been to primary school places, and in London, we've been to Coventry, we've been to Birmingham, we've been to Leeds, York, Sunderland, and we finished up in Liverpool, going around a number of different schools on Monday, and then we were outside Labour Party conference yesterday. It didn't rain, we were all ecstatic, and we had a number of Liverpool children, young people who've been supporting our campaign from local primary schools, leafleting Labour Party delegates and speaking their truth as well, speaking their truth to power, which is something we've been really keen throughout this campaign to really push to make sure that actually young people's voices aren't only heard and respected, but they feel empowered. They don't feel stigmatised or ashamed about talking about why this is something that really impacts on their lives. And we had a really good reception at Labour Party conference yesterday. And this has been another way we've been able to generate a lot of local as well as national press, because again, we want to make sure that the conversations are changing organically on the ground as well. It's about accepting as a society that actually there are people of different economic backgrounds who aren't any less deserving of a bit of extra support. And as a society, we know this will be something that really pushes all our children forward. I wanted to briefly speak to you as well about some of our wider anti-poverty work, and I will wrap up because I know we've got some other really exciting speakers. But the NEU at the moment, we are focusing very hard on free school meals and food poverty as part of our anti-poverty work, but there is a huge number of other things that we want to change as well. So we join with a lot of other colleagues as well, a lot of other comrades, to demand an end to the 2-child limit. We know that this is a very, very simple way of lifting 250,000 children out of poverty, as well as a further 850,000 who will just be lifted out of deep poverty as well. We think that's an absolute no-brainer, and we will continue to campaign and join others in campaigning alongside this. We also do a lot of work around local matters. That is educating with a sense of place. So at the moment, we've got an education system which is very much kind of one size fits all, and we want to push towards a system where actually we consider where a child grows up, what that means, why it's important to know about their local community, their local history, and making things a lot more relevant for them. If children can understand the relevance of what's happening in school into their everyday life, they're going to get a lot more out of it, and I think have a much better understanding of the communities they grow up in. We are constantly doing research and collaboration with other bodies as well into looking at how we can actually, promote the work of this anti-poverty. So we can promote our anti-poverty work through, hard facts and evidence. We know that government needs to see actually why we're saying things. It can't just be this is something that is morally right, though obviously that is an incredibly good reason. Often that's not enough. So we have been doing a lot of work into actually how certain policies impact on schools and how they actually work on families as well. So a good example is that report that I mentioned earlier called the Universalism Multiplier, where we've looked at the immediate impact of Sadiq Khan's rollout of free school meals. And again, it's drawn on a lot of lessons that other councils, other bodies can use from as well. And we've created a lot of support for our members about really practically helping them with tackling poverty in the classroom. Now, teachers, they're not in a position where they can fix poverty. They can't withdraw their wages and give children on the way out handfuls of cash. Ultimately, that is a wider issue, but we do a lot of work in terms of making sure that children who are coming into our classrooms have teachers who really understand their lived experience, who can put things in place that take out some of the unknown about stigma or unthought about stigma. There's a lot of good intentions out there, but sometimes if they're done in the wrong way, then children cannot get what they need out of school. And so we do a lot of work as well into educating our members on tackling poverty in the classroom. So I really wanted to just finish off by kind of putting this back onto you and saying, well, actually, what next? So we want to keep this conversation going. We think that we've won a huge amount of support over the last few years of this campaign, and we're not going to stop. We're not going to stop until we actually win this for all our children. So I just want to put this back to you and say, well, actually, what else could you do? It's fantastic that you're organising meetings like this, but if you're in other groups or if you're in other CLPs or anything like this could be something that you add to your next branch meeting agenda. We'd love you to keep us updated of any local action that you undertake. Wherever we can, we will do our best to support this and to amplify this as well. And we have a partner toolkit as well that I can send on maybe to the chair after this email. I know I haven't got time to kind of take you through this today, but we've got a number of excuse me, of social media assets, as well as practical things you can do in our toolkit that can help you take action, whether that's something online or whether that's helping you organise like a coffee morning or another kind of local action. All these things really help just keep this pressure up and keep us engaging as many MPs as possible. So I will leave that there and I'll just stop my screen share and say again, thank you very much for speaking with me today.
Thank you. It's been amazing. Yeah, it's really packed in a lot of information. I just wondered if we have a few minutes for some questions, if, 3 or 4 questions, if anybody's got anything they'd like to ask. Is that you, Pat, tentatively putting your hand up?
It is. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So,
and then Ray after that, yeah.
Yeah, well done, Marriott. Amazing campaign. It really is an amazing campaign. And I did see you in the distance in Liverpool yesterday with the children. It was sort of packing up. So, so one of the things that sort of came to mind in Liverpool, I went to one of the panel discussions where there were some councillors from London where, in boroughs where free school meals have been provided for primary children anyway for some time before Sadiq Khan's initiative. And, Sadiq Khan's proposal to provide all primary school children in the whole of London with free school meals appeared to come out of the blue. There must have been a lot of discussions and sort of planning behind that and modelling, whatever. I just wondered, is there any indication of other places outside of London, big cities like Manchester, somebody like Andy Burnham or some of these, metros? Are there any kind of initial interest in seeing how this could possibly work in those areas?
I think I'll just ask Ray to ask his question, then you can maybe do both of them at once. Are you right, Ray? Yep. Thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to raise a couple of points that you might have some views on. I've mainly been involved school meals in terms of trying to get our council company that delivers them to pay more than the minimum wage to the staff who are delivering them. And we did get them paid the living wage, and then 2 years later, 2 years ago, they took it away again, saying they couldn't afford to pay it. But a couple of things that came up within that, which I thought were quite interesting. One, I found that PFI schools, which we've got 5 primary schools, the schools were actually charged an indexed linked rate, and so were paying a lot more to their provider companies for the school meals than other schools. We've also got this thing where, you know, when I went to school, school meals cost X amount. I know you've got cash cafeterias, but in primary schools, the primary schools can pretty well charge what they want now. And I just did an FOI around schools, establishing that, you know, the charges vary between sort of £2 and £3.20 for a meal, which is a huge variation. And the other big thing I thought was interesting was the fact that the government funding for free school meals paid to the schools hasn't kept up with inflation.
Yeah.
So you know, the schools are actually having to subsidise the cost of free school meals because schools only get £2.53 per school meal, and I think the NEU says it should be about £3.20. So they're all sort of big factors that complicate the arguments when we're arguing for higher pay. Then obviously we're saying, oh well, you know, we want the kids to be able to afford their meals. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. Do you want to tackle those two, Murray? Thanks very much, Ray and Pat. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think both really good questions and things to think about. I think on the mayoral one, I think one of the big things that we're pushing for in terms of this campaign is making sure this is something that is nationally funded, because London, it's fantastic they're doing it, but it's an unusual circumstance, and it's because of the way that basically London's economy works, and the mayor has been able to fund that by making certain decisions. Now, other economies, they just simply can't do that. So we know that there is a lot of interest from the other metro mayors, and we are engaging with them about this. But one of the things that they keep coming back to say, and that they are right, they're saying, well, actually, we don't have the same kind of money at our disposal or the same kind of powers and controls around schools as is the case in London. And a lot of local authorities and local councils have also very rightly said this. We know there's a huge crisis with council funding. And although, again, if we go back to those London boroughs that were doing this before the mayor came into a kind of London-wide action, those were councils who'd made certain decisions that other councils kind of couldn't make. So we don't want to put additional pressure and financial pressure on those other either mayoral bodies or councils, because it quite simply isn't a possibility for them. But it is something that could be funded nationally. I know that Kim McGuinness, who is the new mayor up of the Northeast, she is doing a lot of work into tackling poverty, and I know that school food is something that she's looking closely at as well. And we've had conversations with other mayors who are looking into the issues around health provision as well for this. So I think in a kind of a long-winded way, I'm saying this is something that no other councils, other mayoral bodies are interested in and are looking into. But it has to come really from a national government funding aspect in order of actually making this kind of a reality. Otherwise, we will end up with a very piecemeal system where if you're in certain cities or certain towns, you will get one thing, but you won't necessarily get the others. And I think this is a big push for really nationalising this, is saying, well, actually, and it links in a little bit to the conversation, I think, Ray, that you started, is about quality. It has to be something where actually it's got to be a quality meal. It's got to be the right quantity and the right quality. Otherwise, you do end up with school food that actually children firstly won't want to eat, but also isn't good enough for them. And we do have to really focus on this. And I think moving then into Ray's question, I think a big pro of universal free school meal provision is that it could allow, and I think there's a real possibility here, to allow schools to get out of some of those contracts. There's a lot of schools that, because essentially the school system is so incredibly fragmented at the moment, schools have kind of gradually over time, and again, because of funding cuts, lost a lot of the in-house provision that they do. Now, not all schools, but quite a lot of schools. And so there's a number of schools who've signed up to kind of real kind of cowboy contracts, because there's been groups that have come into place and they've offered them what looks like a good deal at a good price. You do it for a year, and then when your contract's up for renewal and you renew it, suddenly the prices are 3 times as much, the portions are half as big, and the quality's no good. So, you know, again, I think having something rolled out on a universal rate would hopefully remove, or give us a chance to remove, that fragmentation. And I think on top of that, there's some real golden opportunities here for then pushing towards a much more localized economy. And I think, again, on top of that, a greener economy as well. If this is something where we are providing this, you know, we're providing food and sourcing food a lot more locally, a lot more within those communities, there are much wider benefits for the local community, aside from just the fact that their children are getting the right kind of food that they need. So, you know, and again, I think talking to the living wage, that is absolutely something that's a huge priority as well for this. So we actually do a lot of work, and we have a lot of support from the caterers union as well, because obviously this is going to impact on their jobs. But we do know that a lot of contracts rely on agency work, where that maybe undercuts some of the wages of other caterers. There's a whole lot of bad practice that can happen in there. Again, if this was something which was universal, this is something that could be, I think, got around by basically making sure that these contracts were standardized, and making sure that the right kind of provision was there and the right funding was there to enable all the workers involved in this. And again, going back to that localized economy, were paid a fair living wage. I think just one other point I would say on this as well is that that with, again, those kind of provisions and making sure that it's fair, this gives us a wider, you know, again, there's wider ways that this can be something that is beneficial, not just to young people, but to all the adults involved in this economy as well. Ray, I feel like I might have missed a section of your question, so do let me know if I've kind of cut out anything that you were asking me about.
I think it's fine. I think you sort of covered them both. So, yeah, we'll say thank you very, very much, and we'll move on to Apsana next. You're right to unmute Apsana.